We have Nikkita Oliver, and we have Karisa Morikawa. Karisa's from Choose 180. No, Choose 180. Nikkita Oliver is like from Community, but today from Creative Justice. Oya, please bring in Karisa and Nikkita. Good morning.
Good morning.
What's good? How are you doing this morning? Happy Black History Month.
Happy Black History Month. Let's dive into it. I appreciate your patience, guys. You know, I thought that foster care story there, the King 5 ran, was actually really important. We wanted to get it in this morning. So let me jump right into this. King County prosecutors' progressive reputation is lipstick on a pig. Washington courts have ruled against sentencing children as though they were adults. So why are local prosecutors asking the U.S. Supreme Court to reconsider these rulings? Now, Karisa and Nikkita, both you guys, with a few other people, you wrote this opinion piece right here. Who wants to tell us all about it?
I'm happy to jump in first, and then Karisa, you can correct me where I'm wrong. You know, for a long time, people have been acknowledging that young people are different than adults. We're talking about young folks under the age of 25, just acknowledging that brain science is different. And in 2017, the Washington State Supreme Court made a real significant stride in making that a part of our legal world. And in the Houston Sconyers case, acknowledged the importance of considering youthfulness, especially when sentencing children in adult court. And so that has, in some ways, been a really significant reform to transforming the landscape of the way in which we do juvenile justice in the state of Washington. And in December of 2020, the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office with Pierce County's Prosecuting Attorney's Office filed petition for cert to the United States Supreme Court, a court that has a significant number of justices that have been appointed by the Trump administration and is a considerably conservative court, much more conservative than we've probably seen in the last 50 years. And so this particular petition for cert to the Supreme Court of the United States really, at least for advocates in the state of Washington, but I would say for folks nationally, struck an alarm for us about what could be the long-term ramifications. And King County is kind of hailed as being like this progressive bastion, making a lot of much needed change. And yet, you know, we have to question whether or not that progressiveness is facial. Does it actually make a change when the rubber meets the road?
Right. And a little bit more about that, either for you or for Karisa, is that when you look at the prosecutor's office, and I see you mentioning words here, lipstick on a pig. But when you look at the prosecutor's office, and when I talked to Prosecutor Satterberg, probably about 4 months ago, he held all the programs that they're supporting over there. There's a lot of programs the prosecutors supporting as far as gun violence disruption, as far as diversion programs, and some of everything else. So are you saying that the efforts of the prosecutor's office are disingenuous?
I can jump in here. You know, Dan and his office have clearly come under a lot of heat after making this decision, and for good reason. And, you know, one thing, like you said, Omari, is that we continue to hear in their defense is that they point to their track record of working, you know, to transform the juvenile legal system. And part of that track record involves our organizations, or involves even work that Nikkita, Jess, Martina, and myself have personally been involved in, such as restorative community pathways. And I think that it's important that work is not a scapegoat or a distraction from this decision around Houston Sconyers that is going to have like catastrophic impacts on Black and brown children, potentially all throughout the country. And you know, a big part of the prosecutor's job, arguably, is to hold people accountable. And so I think that they could also appreciate that as community members and as folks who work at community-based organizations that work with the prosecuting attorney's office, that we also need to hold them accountable when they make decisions that are out of line with their professed progressive goals and values of, you know, righting the wrongs of the harms of the prosecutorial practices.
Well, you know what? I just thank y'all for being here this morning. Great to see you guys. But one of the things too is that what really shocks me is how these moves are made without community's insight, without community understanding. Can you guys speak to that a little bit and help us understand how Prosecutor Dan Satterberg has been able to even do this kind of outside of our purview?
You know, that is how prosecuting attorneys' offices generally work. They do not necessarily go to community and ask for feedback on things that they're moving forward on. If we look at what has happened with restorative justice in King County, it's not been because the prosecuting attorney's office reached out to community and said, we have years and years and years of harming Black and brown communities, of incarcerating and caging Black people, and we want to do different. It's actually been because community, especially Black and Native community, have organized ourselves, we've rallied, and we've put pressure on the prosecuting attorney's office to do something different. You know, significantly, we see this around auto decline or putting young people in adult court. We have seen this around the youth jail and challenging prosecutorial practices. We have seen this around individual cases with young people or community rallies. But it is significant, you know, of what you're pointing out, Trey, is that the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, despite being an elected office, never effectively reaches out to community and making these kinds of decisions that have extreme ramifications, not just for our region, but for the nation.
Right. And now my understanding, I'm not an expert on the legislation. I was trying to read up on it, but I'm sure one of you guys is there's legislation that's down there in Olympia that would kind of circumvent, if it's passed, this decision that the prosecutor has put forward. But because they've started a process to the Supreme Court, Washington State might ultimately be safe, but there might be a Pandora's box that's open where other states would now be impacted if the Supreme Court rules in that favor. Can you guys explain that, the legislation and kind of how it impacts nationally?
Yeah, Karisa, do you want to talk about Senate Bill 5120?
Yeah, sure. So there is a Senate bill that Senator Darnell is sponsoring that would codify Houston Scaniers. And so, like you said, Omari, in Washington State, that would be protected. But there are 14 other states to date, most of whom are conservative red states, I think starting with Nikkita's home state, Indiana, that filed their own certs to the US Supreme Court asking the Supreme Court to accept this. And so, you know, not only would this impact Washington State, but there are many other states that are not as progressive as King County or not as progressive as Washington State. And if this were to make it all the way to the Supreme Court and they were to rule that youthfulness should not be considered when sentencing children in adult court, then that gives room for other states to sentence children, particularly Black and brown children, extremely harshly. And it really regresses us from the progress that we've been making thus far. Right. Now, did the prosecutor Satterberg give any rationale as to why his office made this decision?
Yeah, we've heard some arguments, mostly fiscal arguments or issues around prosecutors not having enough discretion, and that discretion being given in particular to judges to be able to make decisions that reflect youthfulness. You know, in our opinion, these particular lines of argumentation, especially, you know, the fiscal argument is incredibly problematic. To say that because of money, we're not going to do the work of ensuring that those who have come before, because this particular case has companion cases that are Ali and Domingo, which would allow the decision in Houston Scaniers to be retroactive. So people who have in the past been sentenced as children in adult court can go back to the court and ask for resentencing. The prosecuting attorney's office has said that would be quite costly, but dollars should be no reason to allow unjust sentences to stand. The second argument around discretion is interesting because the prosecuting attorney's office seems to almost only get upset about discretion when it is seen discretion removed from them. And we know that prosecutorial discretion, just, you know, factually has a lot of issues around racial disproportionality. And so in this particular instance, it would take some discretion away from the prosecuting attorney's office and give more discretion to judges to be able to, in the instance when mitigation around youthfulness has been presented, to actually give young people, children, we're talking about children, lower sentences when they've been declined to adult court.
Well, this is really saying a lot so much. You guys, what can regular folks in community do to support the efforts that you guys are pushing forward? I know that this is really important. And as you spoke about earlier, Nikkita, this is really the work of so many on the ground that have voiced their concern and brought a collective voice to this. What can folks do now as this moves forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things folks can do. I think first of all is making sure that you're educating yourself and being aware of the decisions. Like Nikkita said, a lot of these decisions are made behind closed doors, and I think that that's intentional. And so it's really important to be tuning into things like Converge and reading cross-cut articles. I also think that you can be calling your legislator and telling them to support the Senate bill to codify Houston Sconyers. You could also be calling Dan Satterberg's office, sending emails and letting them know that you don't want them to follow through. You want them to take back their cert, and making sure that you're staying engaged in the process.
Right now,
I think it's very significant. I was just going to say it's very significant that you could ask, that we could be calling and asking this elected prosecutor to withdraw the petition for certification. That being said, we'd also would have to ask him to convince the Pierce County prosecutor to do the same. And I just want to remind people the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office is an elected position, and we will be electing that person in 2022. So it is significant to remember this particular decision.
Right now, I reached out to Prosecutor Satterberg's office and be talking to the prosecutor tomorrow afternoon. They didn't really have a direct comment on this. Wasn't able to get like a direct comment that we could put up here, but the prosecutor's office was like, they welcome this conversation. It was basically kind of the words of it. It's not a direct quote, so I don't want a direct quote, but kind of paraphrase it. But I'm talking to the prosecutor tomorrow, and one of the things the prosecutor talked about was a 3 strikes law, and they're looking at the 3 strikes law down there in Olympia. So two things here. One, do you guys know anything about this 3 strikes law? No, I'll find out more about it tomorrow. But the other thing is, we're going to have the prosecutor here. What question do you have for him?
Well, I can start by doing the 3 strike law, Nikkita, if you want to tune in for the other part. But in the 80s and 90s, as you know, was the tough on crime era, and during that time, we saw a lot of policies be put in place, like the 3 strike law, like mandatory minimum sentences, and those resulted in Black and brown folks having extremely long sentences, excessive sentences. So the 3 strikes law essentially says that if you are found guilty of a crime to a certain degree of severity, I think robberies are under the 3 strikes, then that's 1 strike. If you're found guilty 3 times, you go to prison for life. So that's extreme. That's not you commit a crime and would normally have a life sentence. If it's 3 times, and you go to prison for life. And so that had catastrophic impacts on Black and brown communities throughout the state. And then Nikkita, if you want to get to the second part.
Yeah, I think a majority of my questions when it comes to the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office is, at what point are they going to make their progressive values much more than just a facial statement? I think that Houston Sconyers is not an outlier in terms of how we're seeing things go down in juvenile court. We look at the number of young people that are being declined or sent to adult court from juvenile court who are children, and that number is significantly disproportionately Black youth, and that's incredibly problematic because we're seeing the tough on crime era still continue to play out as it pertains to Black community. And so at what point are we going to see them really participate in resentencing reviews, really prioritize partnering with community to lobby to have legislation changed? Often when we go to the state to have things like 3 strike laws changed or things like Houston Sconyers codified, our biggest opponents are police and prosecutors, and they have so much money to lobby and so many relationships to leverage that it makes getting these changes for community incredibly challenging. So really pressing them on how are you going to see the tough on crime era finally rolled back and making those significant changes and really committing to 0 youth detention in the way that King County has said it is going to.
All right. Looks like we made up a minute here. So I'll give it to you, Karisa. A lot of people know Nikkita Oliver and know the work that she does. Not a lot of people might be aware of Choose 180 and what Choose 180 does. Maybe you could tell our audience quickly.
Yeah, sure. So Choose 180 is a community-based nonprofit organization that seeks to dismantle the school to prison pipeline. So Choose 180 works to, transform systems of injustice, such as the juvenile legal system, while supporting those who are most impacted by those oppressive systems. And I work at Choose 180 as the director of community engagement and systems innovation, which mainly means I'm working on advocacy and policy work alongside our community partners, such as Nikkita Oliver.
All right. And real quick, what's the website there for Choose 180?
It's choose180.org.
Nikkita Oliver, Karisa, man, well, thank you for taking the time. We spent almost 20 minutes on this topic, important topic, and we're going to stay on top of it. We'll talk to Prosecutor Satterberg tomorrow. We'll touch on this and also this 3 strikes.
Yeah.
The 3 strikes is a big deal. Thanks for taking the time, guys. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for your work, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Man.
They didn't mince no words in this crosscut article. I mean, you read the title of the article, it's like, anything else to say?
I just think it's important too that, again, as they said, that these decisions are really made outside of public purview. And so sometimes you have to have those stark headlines, just to drive the point home. And I think they did that really well in this article, and also highlighting so much that the public is not aware of. Again, it's up to us when we think about these elected offices like Dan Satterberg. I love how Nikkita said that. He is an elected official, and ultimately it's on us. We have to be thinking about this in 2022 when his seat is up.
Yeah, well, like I said, we're the only time that works is going to be pre-recorded, so we won't have Prosecutor Satterberg live tomorrow, but we're going to pre-record the interview, and then we'll be airing it on Wednesday. But this is the best thing, is to be able to sit there, have this access. I mean, I reached right out as soon as I saw this article. I reached out and I was like, hey, what's up? And the prosecutor's office got back to me. So we want to be able to inform and engage our community as much as possible.